Hello, everyone. While we wait for folks to jump in, please do let us know in the chat where you're joining from today. And if you're feeling adventurous, perhaps you might want to share a word or two that describes how your week's been thus far.
Welcome, everybody. Hi, Renee from Adelaide. Hello. Auckland.
Auckland, yes. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So feel free to introduce yourself, pop your name into chat and where you're from, and how's your week been?
Yeah, how's the week been?
I did see someone from Canberra there before.
Yeah.
Mark, hello, good morning. Sarah from
Maitland.
Sydney. Oh, fellow Melburnian.
Nice.
Alvi, hello. Oh, and Ricky too. Nice. Working in talent at NAB. Fantastic. Ricky, good morning. Windy
Bit of
and
Sydney
cold.
cider. Yeah.
Oh, Nicolene. I'm dialing in from Melbourne, everybody, and it's been pretty wet and cold here as well. So we've got a bit of sunshine today, which is always fantastic for us Melburnians.
Chris from Christchurch. Kia ora. Looking forward to the weekend. Yeah, likewise. Hi, Chris.
Oh, hi, Chris from South Australia DTF. Great to have you along, Chris. Oh, Hamilton, New Zealand. Hi, Kira. And Western Australia. Hi, Angela. I was in Perth yesterday, actually. Gorgeous day out there. So welcome along. Oh, Anne Boland. Great to see your name pop up, Anne. Good morning. From Mornington Peninsula. Fabulous spot, Anne. Hello. Oh, yes, Will. Hello. Great to have you back back with us. Will was with us in Brisbane for half the session. So terrific to have you back on today's virtual, Will. So good morning.
Isha and Kim. Hi, kia ora.
Des, we've got a great spread of people here today.
Yeah, we do. We do. We're looking like some good representation from
I think we're touching
across the Tasman. Yeah,
every part of Australia and New Zealand by the look of it.
very nice.
Central coast of New South Wales. Good morning, Kirsty.
Wonderful. All right, well, perhaps we should kick off. Hi, Andy. All righty. So, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, and kia ora koutou. My name is Desiree Grant, though most folks call me Des, and I'm one of the directors at PBC based in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand. And on behalf of Shane, Peter, and the entire PBC team, a very warm welcome to you all. It's lovely to have you joining us online today. So it's been a busy year, as always, for us at PBC. We continue to work very closely with Hogan, and we're also continuing to grow our own Hogan 360 product. And as ever, our consultants are out there with our clients implementing best practice data-driven people solutions. We've also been growing our global footprint. And as many of you may know, we've opened up an Auckland office in late 2022. And we're also thrilled to have Kate Modick leading the growth of the Hogan 360 across the Americas. And then more recently, we've established a subsidiary office in Ireland, which means that we now provide in-time zone support and sales enablement to our European distributors. So very exciting times ahead. In terms of the agenda for today's session, we're going to be hearing from two speakers, Hogan's Chief Science Officer, Dr. Ryan Sherman, and PBC's own Head of Practice, Sharon Ardley. They'll take us through two fascinating areas, so how to build high-performing teams with strategic team building, and then what leaders need to know about the hidden cost of toxic employees. So we have held some time at the end of the program for Q&A, but please don't feel that there's any need to hold your questions. We'd love to encourage your participation in today's webinar via the chat function. So please feel free to pop your questions and comments in via the chat as we go along. So our first speaker today is Sharon Ardley, and I'll just give a quick intro on Sharon before I hand over to her. So Sharon has worked right across the talent journey, from helping organizations choose the right people to supporting leaders through career transitions. She's built deep expertise in assessment, selection, development, coaching, and consulting. and she's held a number of senior HR and consulting roles, both in Australia and abroad. And today she's here to share her insights on strategic team building, using personality to drive efficiency, engagement, and results. Kia ora, Sharon, and over to you.
Thanks, Des, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, and also to see so many varied locations on today's webinar. So, look, a great place to start. I know many of you would be very familiar with PBC, but look, if you're not, for whatever particular reason, allow us to just introduce us as an organisation. We're a human capital consulting business. We've been certainly supporting organisations across the public and the private sector for over 30 years, and really supporting them with evidence-based people solutions to support transformation and change, and also build leadership capability as well. In terms of our footprint, Des shared that before, and we're very proud of our partnership with Hogan Assessments for the last 20 plus years as well. So as Des said, I will lead us off with the first session today around strategic team building using personality to drive efficiency, engagement and results. And then I will hand over to Dr. Ryan Sherman around toxic employees. There will be time at the end for questions, but feel free to continue to engage in chat. We'd love to hear your comments along the journey of this morning. Pop any comments, questions, any insights that you'll have as well. Both Des and I will be monitoring that going forward. So personality, it's an area that is absolutely close to all of our hearts. And when we think about it from the point of view of driving team engagement, diversity, and results, there is a lot to share this morning. So I only have a small amount of time, and what I'm looking to cover is just some really interesting insights into leadership and teams, particularly from a global perspective. I'm going to really focus here on the leader's role when it comes to team development, and the leader's role in being able to create and build and certainly manage a high performing team. I'm going to then take that to the next level, which is around personality. So, what that means in terms of driving team engagement, but more specifically, the diversity of personality in teams and how that links to a team becoming high performing. And then for those that are thirsty for even a little bit more knowledge, I'll then layer that to the next level around what are some building blocks around boosting high performing teams. And this is based off some really interesting research we've done around personality and high performing teams. It's a white paper that's available after today's session as well. And it will give some really interesting insights into, what are some areas that teams who are typically high performing tend to demonstrate and exhibit in the workplace as well. Then we'll wrap up with some measuring team effectiveness. So this is a really a strong insight into some tools that you can use in your organizations to really not only identify some areas of strength, but also areas of potential action or development for the team, but more specifically, how do you measure that team effectiveness going forward? So we'll share some insights going forward from there too. One of the things I think that is always really interesting when it comes to teams is getting a sense of what really is the leader's role. I think we all intuitively have a sense of what that should be, but what could actually be a baseline understanding of what that is? And one of the really, I think, wonderful things that Hogan does is share some insights and some evidence around that. And here's a real interesting baseline from Dr. Robert Hogan, founder of Hogan Assessments, around the goal of leadership. And I think this is a really interesting perspective, particularly around being able to build and maintain a team, and also the fact that, a leader's role is so pivotal to a team. And I can always think of times, and I'm sure many of us on today's webinar can, where we've worked for some fantastic teams, and we've also worked from teams that have not been as functional as what they could be. And let's get some interaction happening on chat. So pop your name, or at least whether you have at some stage worked for a team that has not been high performing, that has been dysfunctional for whatever reason. Who has worked for a team like that? And how would you describe that? What's one word you would use to describe working or being a part of a team that is not functional or not high performing? Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. Yep, it was a scary experience. I am not surprised. Sarah, damning slow. Nadia, yet depleting. That's such a good word. Ranu, yeah, toxic. That's an interesting word. We're going to, Ryan will be talking a bit more about that later on. And some unsettling from Andy. That's such an interesting perspective. And also, too, John's talked about it being really draining. And I can see even more chat coming through. Peter Black from Sydney suggested disengaged, lack of focus, chaotic, isolating, and you can see all of those words that are coming through. And thanks for that interaction because I think that really does set the scene. When teams are not performing well and the leader is not leading a team, there are impacts, there are consequences of that. And of course, we've all worked for teams that have been hugely engaging and hugely motivating to work for. So, pop a word for those who have experienced working for a high performing team or being a part of a really engaging team. How has that made you feel in that sense? Sarah, joyful. Yeah, that's a great word to use. And that energized, I love that, Peter. That energy seems to always come through. Supported, empowered, motivated. Thank you, Sarah. Karen, supported. Renee, again, motivated. Validating, that's a nice perspective, Chris. Thank you. Nadia, thriving. I think that's such a great word, Nadia, that sense of thriving. I use a word called it becomes positively contagious, doesn't it? It just seems to build on itself going forward. And we know that when teams and certainly leaders and managers are not engaged, all of those other B-side behaviors pop out. And it was really interesting that Gallup recently produced a whole range of insights into the leadership landscape. And one of the things that was quite interesting was that they had identified through their global research that certainly manager and leader engagement had dropped from 30% to 27%. Now, you might kind of go, well, it's 3%, that doesn't sound too bad. But when you think of every single manager, every single leader, across every element of your organization and you multiply that out from a productivity perspective, that has a real impact. It has an impact to engagement. It has an impact to toxicity in the workplace. It has an impact into clients, customers, regardless of whether you're a public or private sector, having an impact into that. So, you don't have to be Einstein to work out that if managers and leaders are disengaged, guess what? Their teams are too. And off the back of that, often people make decisions. Do I stay? Do I go? And Gallup went on to identify that employees, 49% of them are thinking about leaving. So that's half of a workforce. And from a management leadership perspective, 51% are starting to think, well, what is next? And of course, complexity in any organization seems to be the reality of the day. I'm sure regardless of whether you're public sector or private sector, and I've worked in both sectors, organizations can be a little bit tough at times. It's the old adage of doing more with less, complexity. There's certainly levels of engagement, disengagement. And so with all of that, when thinking about, over half the workforce are thinking about leaving, that is a huge amount of tacit knowledge that walks out the door. That is a huge amount of disruption in trying to find new talent coming into your organization. It also means too that there's a reputational risk for a lot of organisations too, particularly when there is a lot of turnover in that business. So not surprising to see some of those impacts there. But interestingly, Gallup went on to suggest that close to 44% of managers have not had any manager training. Pop into chat. Does that surprise you, or does that not surprise you? That 44% of managers have not had any form of training. Sadly, not surprising. Thanks, Nadia. Nope. Thank you, Nicolene. That's doesn't to the point. Not surprising. Thanks, Angela. Not surprising. Look, that's really interesting feedback there because I also feel the same too. It's not surprising, and I think that speaks to the adage of a lot of organisations will actually go, because someone is such a fantastic technical expert, they're so good at what they do. You know what? Let's promote you to becoming a team leader, a manager, a leader of people, and that leadership muscle is not built for whatever particular reason. So I'm not surprised that will you you've also shared, not surprising, and the fact in your organisation, Will, you're suggesting that your middle managers are doing the first leadership program in 11 years. That is really interesting. And I thank you for the comments too, because, we see this time and time again where people get promoted without the opportunity of having some of that development going forward. And then to build on that, when we think about the leader's role when it comes to leading and managing teams, again, it just really solidifies a point that it is critical. As a result, we know that from a leadership perspective, often it's kind of it's bundled in with the term soft skill, and I find that really interesting. And I've been in and around this space for 30 plus years now. It's that sense of we see leadership here as actually being a hard skill in the sense that it's observable. It's also measurable. You can measure leadership effectiveness. And also, too, we know that leaders can actually be developed as well. So, leaders spend a lot of their time leading teams, leading people, and that link to engagement is absolutely critical. And so, when we think about teams, but also individuals who are not engaged, there is a real business impact and consequence of that as well. For example, I think it was actually Gallup that had identified that up to a third of the workforce at any one point in time can be disengaged. Now, again, if you think over a third, and even if they just move that engagement by 5%, the impact of productivity and performance and culture can be absolutely such a positive outcome. So of that third of a disengaged workforce, they're going out telling everybody else, how disengaged they are, which is just not helpful. So highly engaged leaders who demonstrate behaviours such as strategic leadership, the ability to hold self and others to account, inspirational leadership, that emotional intelligence, and really supported with some significant capability of their own skill set, typically have highly engaged individuals and teams who deliver great outcomes for organisations. The key to this, of course, naturally, is that leadership is the centre of that team orientation, and it's around building results. The quote before from Dr. Hogan suggested that the goal of leadership is to build a team, and the outcome of that is around results at the end of the day. And when we think about teams, teams deliver results. Last time I checked, very few organisations are full of individual contributors. Most people are a part of a team. So teams deliver results. So the importance there is around being able to have the team rowing in that same direction. And when it's working well, the leader is absolutely managing that team well. So therefore, judge the leader by the team. So it's something to think about when it comes to the importance of leaders, leading teams, and leading and building high performing teams. Let's take that to the next level. So no surprises that leaders need to lead teams. But interestingly, teams can be quite complex at times, and that complexity can bring not only some strength, it can also bring some challenges going forward as well. One of the things that's really, I think, critical to the research that we've done, and certainly our own observations and a number of our client conversations too, is that personality is fundamental to a whole range of behaviours in the workplace. And when we're looking at it from the point of view of driving team engagement and the diversity of personality and how it can actually support results, it's a pretty compelling story. Now, again, I think a great place to start sometimes is getting a baseline understanding of the importance of teams. And again, Dr. Hogan's, provided some really interesting insights into this. And again, you wouldn't be surprised with, working towards a common goal, performing, interdependently. There is a sense of common leadership. So there's a leader who's leading three or more people. The team's also connected in the sense that they share a common fate. And they also have a common goal. And certainly, if those goals are met, terrific. If they're not, well, then there's some impacts to that. When you cast your eye through those 5 points, pop into chat. Is there something there that really resonates with you when it comes to teams and also the importance of teams there? I know one of the key things that we spend a lot of time with clients on is creating that sense of a common goal and a common purpose. And that's certainly a really key element for teams going forward. Thanks, Renu. A common fate really speaks to you. That's lovely. Number 4, which is common fate depends on performance of the team. Thank you. Anybody else? What resonates with you in those 5 points? Thanks, Nadia. Number 5, see themselves as being a part of a team with a common goal and a shared fate. Yeah, look, number five's coming up quite a bit here. Thank you. Oh, Nicolene, number one, common goal. Love that. Thank you. That's good feedback. So again, we can actually see here that there's a baseline around what a team is. A high performing team also has a range of characteristics, and they include elements such as being able to be fully aware of their role in achieving organisational goals and that whole sense to strategy. We're spending so much time at the moment with a number of our clients around linking team performance to strategy and the importance of working on the business as a leader and certainly delivering on accountability for teams as well. They also commit themselves to personal development and success of their teams. So, they are really bought into the bigger picture and certainly aligned to strategy. They've got a range of capabilities, and with that capabilities, it's a range of skills and ways of looking at things as well. But I think really one of the key parts underneath that is that they actually encourage a whole range of diversity of perspectives. And that's one of the really lovely things that diversity from a personality perspective brings to the team as well. And I think there's a really key point around they actually do respond quickly when they need to change. They manage and lean into some of those more challenging conversations, and certainly they are resilient, particularly in times of change and transformation or any setbacks that might be there as well. So those characteristics are, I think, a really lovely foundation of a team that is high performing. And when we think traditionally about a team, many organisations that we've worked with, have shared that there's often two sides to building a team, and certainly, the roles that team members play in those organisations. And one of those is very much around that functional component of the team. So think about this as the team or the individuals in the team having that level of subject matter expertise. They're often quite formal because they're recruited on that technical experience, and they're often very formal because it's all around performing tasks and getting things done at the end of the day. Absolutely spot on. Have no problem with that. The flip side to that is often a bit of an informal role that the team play and also the team members play as well. And that is more from a psychological perspective here. And that is bringing a whole range of diversity of personality, of style, of how we see things, how we experience things, what we're motivated by, and certainly what we are engaged by in the workplace. And we know that from a personality perspective, we're often a situation where, there are a number of enabling aspects of our personality as well as derailing aspects of our personality. And we all have very different drivers as well. So that psychological element is a really, I think, fantastic second side to the coin around what team members actually play in terms of the role. And underpinning of that is also the diversity around how teams respond to some of those characteristics too. For example, people will see things in a different way. So, from a cognitive perspective, we process things differently. And we have to think about, neurodiversity in the workplace. And again, the value that that brings as well. Often team members will respond to things in certain ways. We know that when there's, for example, really peak periods of change or peak periods of delivery or peak periods of transformation, people have got different levels of resilience. So emotionally, they're going to respond in a very different way. And also, too, in those times, people may behave differently in those elements. We may get some people that really embrace the creativity of that moment and really demonstrate that lovely sense of innovation. We also have people that might actually have a strong sense of needing security and foundation and feeling like they're very, predictable of what tomorrow's going to bring. So those behavioral preferences can really have an impact as well. So let's put this to the test in terms of the importance of valuing diversity from a personality perspective in the workplace. I have a really interesting case study for us this morning, and again, it's a real life situation, and it's one that we have some significant experience in. For a number of years, we were working with a client who was a tech startup. This was a really interesting organization, and we were working with them literally from the minute they started business. We were doing a lot of their selection debriefs. We were using a lot of Hogan assessments as part of bringing people into the organization. So this tech startup organization was um, was really committed to an ethos, and their ethos was very much around an evidence-based approach to sustainability. They wanted to leave the world in a better place. And so being a tech startup, obviously there's funding that goes with that. There's seed funding, it's quite an entrepreneurial business, and they had a really strong altruistic view to sustainability and certainly, creating a lot of value across the globe as well. And it was interesting that the CPO started to get some really interesting insights into some retention problems. There was a lot of data that the organisation had as a result of completing Hogan assessments. And the CPO and the CEO wanted to really get an understanding of what are the enablers and derailers of them as an organisation, but also, too, what is the common values that they have as an organisation going forward. And so as a result, they undertook a whole range of analysis and using Hogan personality. Now, many of you would be very familiar with this, but if you're not, when we think about Hogan personality, there are three key scales here. The first one is the Hogan personality inventory, or that yellow box that's there. So data from these 7 scales gives any organisation or even in individuals who undertake the assessment a really interesting insight into what brings out their best. So what are they like on a good day at work? It gives you some lovely insight into things like levels of resilience, how people build and maintain relationships, how we actually get ahead in terms of accomplishment, career, and also how we find meaning and learning as well. Motives, values, and preferences. So that inventory, the blue box that's there, gives you a really strong sense of what drives the individual. There are 10 scales there, and it gives anybody an insight into what they value. So evidence-based decision making, is that important for you or not? Recognition, do you like to be recognized for what you do formally or more informally? Whole range of scales there. And the last one there is the Hogan Development Survey, the red scales there. By far my favourite set of scales. 11 scales here, and it gives you an insight into a whole range of strengths that start out as a strength. And it's not until we are in a situation where we could be overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, not well, not managing our behaviours for whatever particular reason, that strength gets stretched out and it becomes an overused strength or a derailing behaviour. And that derailing behaviour can impact, if it's not managed, an individual's reputation, which could impact things like productivity, performance, career, etc. So the combination of these 3 scales gave some pretty interesting insights into this tech startup. Now, for the purposes of today's case study, I just have the HPI data and also the motives, values, and preferences data as well. So a bit of a crazy slide here, but go with the story as we are talking it through. So the yellow line that you see going across the scale there is actually the leadership team. So that is their average across all of those 10 motives, values, or preferences scale. The blue line is actually the rest of the organization. Now, again, because we've worked with this business for so long, we've got a whole range of data, which is what those grey lines mean as well. Now, the blue box there, the green boxes around altruism and around science gave us a really interesting insight into this business. So, as an organisation, there was no surprises that not only the staff but the ELT had a really strong preference for the scale around altruism. So, remember, the ethos was to leave the world a better place. Really deep care, really deep passion for community, wanted to make a difference, altruistic pursuits. They're also a tech startup. And as a result, that whole sense of evidence-based, data-driven. So the science scale here is a scale that really leans into the preference around evidence-based numbers, facts, figures, research to be able to make decisions. So there was no surprises here that there was such a lovely alignment between the staff and also the ELT. Common value, common pursuit. Interestingly, the story gets a little bit deeper. Look at the difference here around security. Now, this was where the CPO absolutely had an epiphany at this particular point. So, interestingly, what we found here was that the ELT had an average of 35 for this particular scale and the workforce 52. So security is all around level of predictability, level of certainty. And as an ELT, being a tech startup, they were entrepreneurial. They loved and felt very comfortable in the grey. They were able to move through that level of grey and ambiguity pretty quickly. The rest of the staff were not. So as a result, a number of the staff started to feel a bit nervous about what the future is going to bring. This is where the turnover had started. And it was interesting when the CPO and the CEO saw that, it really gave them an insight into, from a workforce diversity perspective, we need to pay a little bit more attention to our communication. We need to pay a little bit more attention to how we are recruiting people. We need to give more of a realistic job preview to people that we are having conversations with from a recruitment perspective when they come to join our company. So, first layer. The second layer was actually getting a sense of what's the makeup of the ELT. So, from a personality and a diversity of personality perspective, often a spread is good. For example, the first scale there that you see for the ELT is around adjustment. So, adjustment here is the ability for somebody to respond to stress, their level of resilience through stress, how they cope with pressure in the workplace. So, if you higher up the scale, like the blue dot is at 93, then someone is reasonably resilient. That's the strength that comes with that. Also, too, there are other people that probably are a little bit more alert to the environment around them, and that's that kind of olive green person at number 4. So what's happening here is that people have got a varying degree of how they are responding to some of those workplace scenarios. So from a diversity of perspective, this here is around being able to recognize that not everybody is going to see and respond to stress in the same way. Likewise, with interpersonal sensitivity, this is very much around caring, sensitivity, the ability to demonstrate emotional intelligence in the workplace. Now, those who are typically higher in interpersonal sensitivity have that level of more diplomatic views, highly, quite emotional intelligent generally. They also sometimes may not always lean into some of those difficult conversations. Likewise, with some of those that are lower in interpersonal sensitivity, more direct, more blunt, a little bit more candor, may not always pick up on the nuances. So again, some lovely sense of diversity across the team here. Story gets a little bit richer. Story gets a little bit more detailed. Have a look at these ones here. So remember, this is a tech startup. This is the ELT profile. We have a cluster around ambition. So this is an ELT that is driven for results, driven to achieve, want to accomplish, set the world on fire would be something else I would say here. And have a look at the inquisitive scale there. So there's a big cluster that's happening for the ELT there. So not only results driven, shoot the lights out, highly creative, innovative, endless, boundless possibilities. When we overlay that with a lower cluster for prudence, which is actually around the team and how they lean into things like details, implementation, planning, organizing, lower preference here. So there's lots of fantastic, great ideas going on, missing the opportunity to be able to maybe think through, are these ideas practical? Can they be implemented? Are they in line with strategy? What does that mean for the workforce going forward? So when we think about diversity of personality, even though we've got 3 interesting clusters there, there's a couple of small outliers here. So have a look at the first star for prudence. So sometimes being able to make sure that everybody has a voice and everybody contributes and everybody is recognised for how they see things in the world is certainly a really key message here. So what happens here is that if the organisation perhaps might have potentially engaged that person a bit more, particularly around implementation, planning, organising, how we plan our projects, etc., it might have been an opportunity because unfortunately this company, the funding was not renewed going forward. So again, lots of great ideas, but they just weren't being implemented well. Likewise with the star around inquisitive. So again, this person may have had a perspective around practicalities, but the remainder of the group was so buzzed by new and exciting things, maybe that voice wasn't heard. So when I link things like, in particular, the blue star above prudence, that person with a very strong attention to detail, certainly very diplomatic. They're very high on interpersonal sensitivity. They're also quite low on sociability. So this person may not have always spoken up. So again, diversity is also being able to recognize everybody's perspective and everybody's view around some of those opportunities. Again, interesting case study here going forward. So conscious of time, and if let's think about, what might be some building blocks of teams going forward, and how might we think about actually boosting high performing teams. So I mentioned we've got a white paper called Personality in High Performing Teams. I'm just going to give you a really quick highlight of some of that research going forward, because the paper will actually come out as some resources after today's webinar. So when we think about, what are some of the typical elements of a high performing team from a personality perspective, there's a couple. When we look at the Hogan personality scales, there are four really interesting scales here that tend to speak to teams who are high performing from an enabling perspective. One of those is around adjustment. Now, again, having a spread of adjustment is really a positive thing here. But typically, those teams who profile with higher levels of adjustment tend to be a little bit more calm, a little bit more composed, and certainly a little bit more constructive under pressure. The reason why is that they tend to be a little bit more resilient. They can tend to manage stress a bit more, adapt in the moment, so to speak, and certainly continue to focus on those days where it might be a little bit challenging. Teams that are also high in ambition, again, tend to be high performing. Now, again, I would overlay that with you. Like we saw in the case study, you wouldn't want everybody bunched up together. You want a nice spread. But certainly, if there is a number of team members who are high in ambition, typically they've got good drive. They've got that ability to really keep focus when it comes to goals and ambitions as well. They're often very quite strategic, and certainly are very strong at being goal focused and results outcome orientated as well. Team members and teams who are typically higher in sociability. Now, again, the caveat: you want a nice spread, because if everyone's high in sociability, people may struggle sometimes to get a word in. But typically, those who are high in sociability tend to like to connect with others. They tend to like to be able to affiliate. They tend to like to be able to be reasonably quite positive and certainly very engaging in terms of a team makeup. And when that's supplemented with higher levels of interpersonal sensitivity, then we've actually got that level of caring and that level of emotional intelligence. Now, again, I would point out here that you'd want a nice spread of something like interpersonal sensitivity, because if everyone is high in interpersonal sensitivity, then what might happen is that we're all really, really nice. Perhaps we don't often have some of those more difficult conversations. So again, a nice spread here. All of this information is in the white paper, but again, if I'm going to take it to the next level and look at the Hogan Development Survey scales. So there's a few of them here. Now, typically, all of these scales start out as a strength before they derail. So all of these scales actually have a strength before they start impacting the team. So that first one around skeptical. Now, again, the strength here is around someone who's actually pretty perceptive. They're usually pretty bright. The flip side to this, of course, when that perception can sometimes get overused, some teams might start to demonstrate things like cynical behavior, a little bit defensive, for example, might be overly critical of others, not helpful when you're trying to get things done. High levels of cautious. Now, people who the strength of cautious is certainly people who are very considered in what they think and see. It's not until that sense of cautiousness is overused and stretched, people might actually start to be a little bit reluctant to speak up. They may not, and they may not always present with what they're trying to say here. They might make some quick decisions, for example, under pressure. Reserved here, the strength of that is actually, again, someone who's reasonably, measured, pretty balanced in terms of how they see the world. But when they tend to become overused, what happens here is that they may withdraw from those social situations, become a little bit aloof, a bit tough, a bit stand back. So again, they don't engage at that part. not helpful when you're trying to actually work as a team, particularly if people tend to shut off a little bit. Next one's around leisurely. So people, appear to be fairly agreeable on the surface, for example, but can certainly become a bit passive aggressive, not always speak up in terms of of what they might be thinking or what they might be feeling. Mischievous. I always think that sounds like such a fun scale. So the strength here is people who have got a bit of an appetite for risk. The flip side is that risk can also be a bit impulsive at times. They might test limits. They might be quite charming to begin with, but they are pushing the boundaries all the time. Imaginative starts out as being incredibly innovative and creative. It flips over and then becomes certainly very unconventional or a bit impractical at times as well. And excitable here is, starts out as being quite passion, energy, drive, sense of fire in the belly, as I often call it. But what happens is that strength becomes overused and certainly can become overly emotional, can be distracting for people. Volatility, again, not helpful behaviors when you want the team moving in the same direction. There is a third scale called motives, values, and preferences. And the big scale there, through the research that we've done, tends to indicate that teams who value that level of affiliation, connectivity with others, is a foundation that is pretty hard to beat. And for teams that we do a lot of work with, particularly that have a natural affinity award affiliation, they're a little bit more open to things like team discussion, group discussions, being able to connect with others going forward. So it's a really strong foundation for that team success. And some of the ones to watch out for include tradition and security. So tradition here, particularly if it's a high scale for a number of team members, it tends to mean that they like that way of considered and certainly very established methods and ways of working. Sometimes it might stifle a bit of innovation at times. And security, as we learnt from our case study, people with high levels of security like that predictability of tomorrow. Now, again, nothing wrong in that. It only comes a bit of a risk in those complex times where people then may not always be open to change or slow things down. There is a lot more information in our white paper, and I would absolutely encourage everyone on today's call to read that, because there's some even more deeper information in that white paper as well. Before I hand over to Ryan, let me just share with you some tools and some insights into what you might want to think about when it comes to measuring that team effectiveness. So, again, when we're thinking about a high performing team, we've got to measure, is it working well? What is working well? And what could we be doing differently going forward as well? So, can I just get a bit of a response in chat? Who has heard of the high performing team assessment? Just pop in a yes or a no. Thanks, Nadia. Yes, that's great to hear. Angela, yes, thank you. Oh, a few people. That's fantastic. Oh, thanks, Anne Boland. That's good. Nicolene, oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, I can move through this pretty quickly then, based on all that insight and positive feedback. So when we think about measuring team effectiveness, the HPTA, the High Performing Team Assessment, is a great tool that can help you in the organisation. Think about this as the team rating itself. So, for example, when we think about a 360, for example, that's where the individual goes out and gets feedback from their raters. In this particular diagnostic, what happens is that the team actually rates itself against two domains: performance and culture. So performance is, what is the team performing? How does the team see its role in performing? And also culture. How does the team view the culture of that team? So it's the team rating itself against a whole range of criteria across those 12 sub themes there, for about 60 items. It's benchmarked, so it gives you a sense of, how does the team see itself against other high performing teams? It also gives you an insight into not only the relevant domain, but the sub theme, for example, strategy, and specific items that fit in underneath that. And again, the overall team average against the benchmark average as well. And I find this really helpful because the team is rating itself. So it gives you a sense of how the team sees its strengths and that real focus areas of development or action planning going forward. The diagnostic also gives you a range of opportunities to improve, and there are 15 of them. And what I like about this particular page is that you can only rate 4 of them, and you can award a maximum of 4 points, 3 points, 2 point, or 1 point against 4 out of those 15 items. And again, it's the team really pinpointing what are the most important areas to improve. We typically run this as a 3-hour workshop, and here is an opportunity for the team to think about some action planning going forward. And I make this point because certainly in my experience as an ex-CPO, I find that organisations spend a lot of time focusing on individual development or maybe organisational development. Often a missed opportunity here is around team development, and that's what this particular tool will be able to help you. And it gives you that sense of how does the team see itself. It is also a fantastic complement to the Hogan personality scales as well, because when we actually then engage that with looking at the data around personality against the team profile, it gives you a really strong sense of how the team is enabling and derailing, and what are some of the really strong values that run through the team as well. It also gives you a sense of actions off the back of it, and that then creates even more and deeper team cohesion and effectiveness as well. So I am conscious that I need to wrap up before Dr. Ryan Sherman joins us. So just a few things to finish off on here. Diversity, can I say it's important? It's not just important, it's critical. So those individual differences, including personality, create a wonderful sense of diversity, which increases discussion, which makes even better decisions in an organisation. Teams are critical to organisational success. We know that, we've seen that. You've got a whole range of characteristics of high performing teams that we've just talked about, and the leader is central and pivotal to that. Therefore, judge the leader by the team. Personality, whether it's an enabler or a derailer, has an impact, and certainly understanding some strategic self-awareness, team awareness is something I would recommend and advocate for everyone on today's webinar. And measurement is absolutely critical, evidence-based, reliable, valid, and certainly giving you the right insights into that team cohesion and makeup going forward. I have absolutely loved a lot of your comments in today's session. Thank you so much. I am conscious of time. And can I take a moment, please, to hand back to you, Des, to welcome Dr. Ryan Sherman. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, Shaz, thank you so much. Really, really insightful presentation. Just also to say, I think we've all been part of a functional team and a non-functional team, and being part of a functional team is an absolute game changer. As you said, it's positively contagious. I also really liked your point around the fact that team members have both a functional and a psychological role to play. I don't think we think about that often enough. There's the job, and then there's the unspoken value that we bring to the table as well. There are also 2 questions for you. The first one is from Ricky. So do you often see people lower on the sociability but higher on the other scales, and that they're still high performers?
Thank you, Ricky. I see every combination out there, I think, is probably how I would respond to that. And it's interesting, even though someone may be lower on any scale, and you've mentioned sociability just as one of them, personality is what personality is, and it's pretty stable over time. But when we overlay that with our chosen behavior, so you might be the world's biggest introvert, for example, because there's a low sociability score, but you know what? You build up the behavior. And so when we have personality plus behavior, it actually ends up equaling our workplace reputation. So we can always build that out. Personality is not fate at the end of the day.
Well, you kind of speak to the second question from Rachel, which is how flexible are personality styles or preferences, and what role does environment play? So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
look, that's a great question. And again, if I just think about sociability, for example, even if someone's at the opposite end of that scale, and they could be 100 for sociability, and I might be actually letting out a bit of a personal secret on that scale. It is very much around how you adapt to the environment. So, and how you, even from a coaching perspective, being very self-aware of impact of self in the workplace and how we modify and certainly manage that going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Shaz. Really
Okay.
appreciated that. Thank you.
Thank you.